Asterisk, when we speak about nations, we're not merely talking about borders or governments. We're talking about deep, historical structures, civilizations that embody thousands of years of struggle, triumph, and tragedy. And when a country like India makes a move on the global stage, it isn't random. It's the consequence of patterns, cultural ambition, economic necessity, and geopolitical destiny. Now, there are whispers that India has a secret strategy, one directed at none other than the United States of America. And if these whispers hold any truth, the implications are staggering. Because this isn't just about economics or military alliances or political gamesmanship, it's about the balance of power in the world and the story of what civilization will dominate the 21st century. So tonight, I want to take you into that story, a story that will unsettle you, challenge you, and perhaps if you're paying attention, change the way you see the future of our world. Asterisk, India's rise on the global stage is not accidental, nor is it simply the result of short-term policy decisions. It is the product of a civilization that has endured for thousands of years and has now found itself in a position of historic opportunity. When we talk about ambition, particularly national ambition, it's important to understand that it isn't driven solely by economics or military might. It is also driven by identity, by cultural confidence, and by the collective memory of a people who believe they are destined to play a larger role in shaping the future. India today represents one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Its young population, its rapidly expanding technological sector, and its influence in international institutions are signals of a nation preparing itself not to remain a secondary player, but to become a central architect of global order. What makes this ambition significant is its timing. The 21st century has presented a unique set of circumstances: the relative decline of Western dominance, the internal political struggles within America, and the overextension of Chinese power. Into this environment steps India, positioned strategically between East and West, with the ability to interact with both spheres of influence while maintaining its independence. Unlike many nations that rely heavily on one major power, India has cultivated a foreign policy of multi-alignment, engaging with the United States, Russia, and even China when necessary, while simultaneously strengthening ties with emerging economies. This is not the behavior of a passive nation. It is the posture of a country carefully preparing to leverage global disorder into an opportunity for leadership. At the cultural level, India's ambition is also fueled by a return to civilizational pride. For centuries, India was subjected to colonial domination, its resources extracted, and its identity fragmented. The current leadership has worked to reframe India not merely as a modern state, but as the inheritor of an ancient civilization with unique contributions to science, philosophy, and spirituality. This narrative fuels national confidence and provides a foundation for long-term ambition. A country that sees itself as the heir to thousands of years of history does not aspire only to participate, it aspires to lead. Furthermore, India's geographic and demographic realities reinforce this drive. With a population of over 1 billion people, many of them under the age of 30, India possesses a workforce and consumer base that the world cannot ignore. This demographic advantage, if properly harnessed, ensures decades of growth potential, innovation, and influence. Combined with its strategic location at the center of the Indo-Pacific, India's role in controlling trade routes, security partnerships, and diplomatic negotiations is only becoming more pronounced. Taken together, these factors reveal a picture of a nation that is not content with incremental progress. India's ambition is to redefine its place in the global hierarchy, to move from the periphery to the center. And it is precisely this ambition that raises questions for the United States, because when another civilization begins to assert itself with such determination, the balance of power inevitably begins to shift. India's pursuit of global influence cannot be separated from its deliberate economic strategy. At the heart of this ambition lies the building of strategic economic partnerships, both with traditional allies and with nations that might have once been considered rivals. For India, these partnerships are not just about trade or access to markets. They are instruments of power, leverage, and security in an increasingly unstable world. When a country of more than 1 billion people, with a rapidly growing economy, positions itself as a hub for global commerce, it inevitably begins to shift the global order. One of the most striking features of India's economic strategy is its dual approach. On one hand, India maintains deep ties with the United States and Europe, seeking investments, technology transfers, and access to advanced markets. On the other, it cultivates relationships with nations outside the Western Bloc, Russia, Iran, and African countries, ensuring that it is never fully dependent on any single power. This kind of economic balancing act signals a country that refuses to be locked into someone else's vision of the world. Instead, India is constructing its own network of interdependence, one that secures its autonomy while expanding its influence. Energy is a key example. India is one of the largest consumers of oil and natural gas in the world. Rather than leaving itself vulnerable to Western supply chains, it has strengthened ties with Middle Eastern producers and even turned to Russia for discounted energy, despite global pressure to isolate Moscow. This pragmatic approach demonstrates how India views economics not as a moral choice, but as a strategic necessity. Every deal, every trade agreement, every investment is calculated to serve its long-term national interest. The technology sector is another domain where India is building strategic leverage. By positioning itself as the world's IT hub and nurturing a rapidly expanding startup ecosystem, India has become indispensable to global innovation. Western corporations rely heavily on Indian engineers, programmers, and digital infrastructure. This dependence quietly shifts power toward India, granting it an influence that extends far beyond the traditional boundaries of trade. At the same time, India is fostering domestic champions in fields like renewable energy, telecommunications, and defense manufacturing, reducing its reliance on foreign technology over the long run. India also understands the symbolic power of partnerships. Its role in organizations like BRICS, the G20, and the Quad is not incidental. Each membership places India at the intersection of global debates, allowing it to shape economic policies and align with nations that share its interests. Whether engaging with emerging economies to promote alternative financial systems or working with Western democracies to counterbalance China, India's participation signals that it is not merely reacting to global changes, it is helping design them. What emerges is a portrait of a nation using economics as a weapon of diplomacy. Instead of confronting powers directly, India leverages partnerships to expand its influence while avoiding entanglement in rigid alliances. It gains resources, access, and credibility, all while retaining flexibility in a polarized world. For the United States, this poses a subtle but profound challenge. A partner that is also a competitor, an ally that refuses to submit, India is redefining what it means to be an economic power in the 21st century. India's rise is inseparable from its focus on technological and military growth. A nation that aspires to global influence cannot rely merely on cultural identity or economic partnerships. It must also demonstrate its ability to defend itself and to innovate in ways that shape the future. For India, this dual pursuit has become central to its long-term vision of power. The technological revolution underway within the country, paired with significant military modernization, signals not just a bid for security, but a desire to project strength and command respect in an increasingly competitive world order. On the technological front, India has emerged as a global hub of innovation. With one of the largest pools of engineers and scientists in the world, the country has transformed from being primarily a service provider to an incubator of new technologies. Its advancements in fields such as space exploration, artificial intelligence, digital infrastructure, and renewable energy are not only building domestic resilience, but also positioning India as a key player in the international technology race. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, for instance, has stunned the world with cost-effective space missions, including a successful lunar landing near the moon's south pole, something even the most powerful nations struggled to achieve. These feats showcase India's ability to do more with less, and they send a clear signal: India intends to be at the frontier of human advancement. Equally significant is India's commitment to digital governance. Initiatives like Aadhaar, a biometric identification system covering over 1 billion citizens, and UPI, a groundbreaking digital payment network, have become global case studies in technological innovation. By developing scalable, inclusive systems, India demonstrates that it is not merely adopting Western technologies, but creating its own models that can be exported to the world. This technological confidence strengthens its claim to leadership, particularly in the global South, where other nations look to India as an example of how to leapfrog into the future without relying on Western dominance. Yet technology alone does not guarantee security or influence. This is where India's military growth enters the picture. Surrounded by rivals like China and Pakistan, and positioned in the critical Indo-Pacific region, India cannot afford weakness in defense. Over the past 2 decades, it has invested heavily in modernizing its armed forces, developing indigenous weapons systems, and expanding its naval presence to secure vital sea lanes. Its collaboration with countries like France, Russia, Israel, and the United States in defense production reflects not dependency, but strategic diversification. By sourcing technology from multiple partners while simultaneously strengthening domestic defense industries, India ensures it cannot be easily pressured or isolated. India's nuclear capability adds another layer of deterrence. As one of the few nations with such power, it commands recognition as a serious military force. Combined with its growing cyber and space defense programs, India is signaling that it intends not only to protect its borders, but also to play a decisive role in shaping security dynamics far beyond South Asia. Taken together, India's technological and military progress represents more than just development. It is the embodiment of a deeper ambition to transition from being seen as a regional actor to being acknowledged as a global power. In a world where innovation and security define status, India is steadily building the tools it needs to ensure that its voice cannot be ignored. This transformation challenges existing hierarchies, particularly those dominated by the United States, because it reveals a competitor capable of both intellectual ingenuity and hard power projection. The future of global power is being rewritten in Asia, and India sits at the center of this transformation. For decades, the region has been dominated by the rivalry between China and the United States, with smaller nations forced to navigate between these two poles. But India has refused to remain in the shadows of that binary. Instead, it has begun cultivating a web of shifting alliances that allow it to exert influence without being trapped by any single camp. This strategy reflects a sophisticated understanding of power politics. In a fragmented world, flexibility is strength. India's relationships across Asia are not simple friendships or alliances of convenience. They are calculated, layered, and pragmatic. Take its ties with Japan, for example. Both nations share concerns about China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific. Through forums like the Quad, an alignment that also includes the United States and Australia, India and Japan cooperate on security, technology, and infrastructure projects. Yet India does not stop there. Even as it strengthens bonds with democratic powers, it maintains economic and defense relations with Russia, a country increasingly isolated by the West. This duality signals India's refusal to be bound by rigid ideological blocs. The same pattern emerges in India's dealings with Southeast Asia. Through its Act East policy, India has deepened ties with countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Singapore, not only in trade but also in defense cooperation. These nations see India as a counterweight to China, a regional power capable of balancing Beijing's influence without the historical baggage that often accompanies American involvement. By positioning itself as an alternative partner, India gains both trust and leverage. It is constructing a network of relationships that enhance its standing while avoiding overdependence on the West. Another crucial dimension lies in India's ties with the Middle East. Traditionally, the region was seen through the lens of oil dependence, But today the relationships are broader, spanning investment, defense, and even space cooperation. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, once considered firmly aligned with the U.S., are increasingly working with India on infrastructure and technology initiatives. This not only provides India with resources, but also integrates it into a strategic corridor stretching from the Gulf to Southeast Asia, a corridor that could rival China's Belt and Road Initiative. Perhaps the most striking aspect of India's approach is its willingness to engage even with adversaries when it suits its interests. Despite border tensions with China, India continues to trade with Beijing, recognizing that cutting ties entirely would be self-defeating. Similarly, while relations with Pakistan remain hostile, India leverages regional forums to ensure that it retains a voice in South Asian affairs. This ability to manage hostility while still pursuing pragmatic cooperation underscores a mature, long-term strategy. In essence, India's alliances are not about loyalty, they are about positioning. By spreading its influence across multiple fronts, India avoids the trap of dependency and maximizes its options in times of crisis. This shifting architecture of partnerships makes India unpredictable and therefore powerful. For the United States, this creates a dilemma. India can be both an ally and a challenger, depending on the circumstance. In a world where alliances are no longer absolute, India is mastering the art of strategic ambiguity, and that is reshaping the balance of power in Asia. The United States has long assumed its position as the dominant power of the modern world, both militarily and economically. For decades, this dominance seemed unshakable, with America dictating the rules of trade, technology, and international politics. But in recent years, cracks have begun to appear, and into those cracks steps India, quietly, deliberately, and with increasing confidence. The challenge India poses to U.S. dominance is not the loud, confrontational type associated with rivals like Russia or even China. Instead, it is subtle, rooted in economics, diplomacy, and cultural influence. It is the kind of challenge that builds slowly until one day it becomes undeniable. One of the first arenas where India undermines American primacy is in the global economy. The U.S. has historically held the upper hand in shaping financial systems and trade networks, but India is now offering alternatives, particularly for developing nations. Through its leadership role in organizations like BRICS, India advocates for multipolar financial structures, encouraging nations to reduce their dependence on the U.S. dollar. This shift, while gradual, erodes one of America's greatest tools of influence, its control over global finance. A world less reliant on U.S. economic systems is a world where America's leverage weakens and India's voice grows louder. Another layer of this challenge lies in the realm of technology. For years, American companies defined the digital age. Yet India, with its vast pool of engineers and innovators, is no longer content to simply consume or outsource. It is creating. India's digital payment systems, biometric identity programs, and space achievements stand as evidence that the country can design and export its own models. This puts India in direct competition with American tech dominance, especially in the global south, where nations may find India's low-cost, scalable innovations more accessible than those of the U.S. The subtle message is clear. The future of technology does not belong exclusively to Silicon Valley. Diplomatically, India also presents a challenge through its refusal to align unconditionally with U.S. interests. Unlike traditional allies that follow Washington's lead, India pursues an independent path. Whether it is maintaining ties with Russia despite Western sanctions or continuing trade with Iran, India demonstrates that it will not be coerced into obedience. This independence frustrates Washington because it undermines the idea that America sets the global agenda. India's balancing act signals to the world that there are viable alternatives to the U.S. centric order, and many nations are beginning to take notice. Finally, there is the cultural dimension. America has long exported not only goods but also values and ideology, shaping global perceptions through media, education, and political institutions. Yet India, with its civilizational depth, now positions itself as a spiritual and cultural counterbalance. The rise of yoga, Ayurveda, and Indian philosophical thought in global discourse may seem benign, but they symbolize a broader shift. The world is looking to India not just for commerce, but for meaning. This soft power, combined with hard economic and military growth, makes India's rise far more profound. Thus, the challenge India poses to U.S. dominance is not a frontal attack, but a gradual redirection of global attention and loyalty. It does not seek to replace America in every sense, but to create a system where America is no longer the sole leader, and in that subtle reordering, the world changes. The balance of power in the world has never been fixed. It shifts like the tide, rising and falling with the fortunes of nations and the choices of leaders. For the past century, the United States has stood at the peak of that order, shaping the rules of trade, politics, and culture. But history teaches us that no empire remains unchallenged forever. Today, we are witnessing the early stages of a transformation in which India is emerging as a central actor, and this shift has the potential to redefine the global landscape in ways that will shock those who assumed American dominance was permanent. The essence of a balance of power shift is not just military might or economic numbers. It is influence. Influence over markets, over resources, over technology, and most importantly, over ideas. India is gradually building this influence by combining its demographic advantage, technological growth, and strategic diplomacy into a coherent direction. Its ability to engage with both Western democracies and non-Western powers demonstrates that it can function as a bridge, connecting worlds that have often stood apart. This role as a connector makes India uniquely positioned to shape the emerging multipolar order. The key to this shift lies in the decline of singular authority. The United States once dictated terms, while other nations followed. Now we see fragmentation. China rises but faces suspicion and pushback. Russia remains a military power, but is isolated in many respects. The European Union struggles with internal fractures. Into this fractured environment, India steps with stability, neutrality, and ambition. It does not demand submission but offers partnership, and that makes its rise more acceptable to nations weary of choosing sides in a polarized world. At the same time, India's growing strength in the Indo-Pacific gives it leverage over one of the most vital regions for global trade and security. Whoever controls this region will influence the flow of goods, energy, and information for decades to come. By expanding its naval power, investing in regional partnerships, and asserting itself in disputes, India signals that it intends to play a decisive role in shaping the future of Asia, and by extension, the world. Yet the balance of power is not only about hard strategy, it is also about perception. More and more, nations see India as a rising power that cannot be ignored. This perception creates momentum. Once countries begin to align themselves with India's vision, the shift accelerates. What was once unthinkable, a world where the U.S. is one power among many, becomes inevitable. The story of the 21st century will not be one of American dominance alone, but of competing centers of gravity, with India standing as one of the most influential. This is what shocks the world, that the change does not happen with a single dramatic event, but with a steady accumulation of choices, partnerships, and assertions. The old order dissolves quietly until suddenly it is gone. The new order is not a world led by one superpower, but one defined by balance, and India is positioning itself to be the anchor of that balance.